My name is John Funk, but people call me Jack. And I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1928, September of 1928.
Birthday.
Birthday?
You remember your birthday, right?
Yes.
September
28th.
28th.
28th of September 1928.
28.
Yes.
Okay.
And I went to school in Philadelphia, and I went to Temple University and graduated. I was on a gymnastics scholarship. I graduated in 1950.
When did you graduate high school?
I graduated high school in 1946.
1946. And then you entered into Temple University?
Then I went to Temple University on a gymnastics scholarship.
Gymnastics scholarship. So you were sort of known for athlete?
I was a gymnast, an athlete in high school, and as a result of that, I was fortunate enough to be provided a scholarship and a paid tuition for 4 years, and it was very. It helped me a great deal in the future, and I will explain.
Very nice. Temple University is one of the best in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Well-known university. I know. My sister graduated, cousin.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And so, upon graduation, I was familiar that the Korean War was occurring. And from a young man on, I really always wanted to be part of the Army. I wanted to be a soldier. Of course, during World War II, I was a teenager, and everyone in the neighborhood was touched by World War II, and I had that feeling, because of World War II, I suppose.
What part of the World War II make you feel that I want to join the military? What is it, patriotism, or what is it?
I think it was a young boy's feeling that he wanted to do something good and be part of the spirit of the country at that time. And I think that's probably was my motivation. It was just the spirit that the country had at that time, the good spirit. They banded together with all the other nations and participated in World War II.
Did you know anything about Korea at the time when you were in either high school or in Temple University?
No, not really, Doctor. I didn't. But of course, in 1950, I did, and I began to become interested, and I registered for the draft like everyone else, and I had a college education, and I could become an officer if I would volunteer for active duty as a result of my college education, which I did. I applied for a commission in the Medical Service Corps, and I think I asked for the Medical Service Corps because my basic education in my undergraduate training was in health and physical education. So I applied for a commission in the Medical Service Corps, and I was accepted, and I was placed in the reserve, and of course I volunteered for active duty, and I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Medical Service Corps of the United States Army. And that would have been in around February, and I was in the reserve at that time. Then
1950?
In
51.
No, it would have been 51.
51, right, thank you. And then I was in the reserve, but then I was called to active duty with orders to report on the 1st of June, 1951, to Fort Sam Houston for basic training. But I must tell you that my wife and I were married in May of 1951.
So please tell me about you. Introduce yourself. Your name, please?
My name is Helen Funk,
Uh-huh.
and I grew up in Philadelphia. And when Jack was a teenager and he was a lifeguard at a pool, swimming pool, near where I lived, I would take my cousins over there. I was babysitting one summer, and I met Jack, and that's how we became friends.
You were attracted to his...
Yeah, to his muscles and everything, and his shirt that said lifeguard on it. And so then we started to date a little bit, and that was the beginning of our friendship. And so when I was just starting high school, and he was a few years into high school, that's when we kind of started going together, and it's been that way ever since.
It must have been very hard for you to being separated.
Oh, it was very hard, very hard. Fortunately, I stayed with my parents at my home, and I had a job, and so, you know, we just kind of wrote all the time and tried to call on occasion. Yeah, we finally got through that year. And then after that year, then we began the Army career together at that point.
Oh, that's...
And
So you're still married?
Yes, 63 years soon.
63 years?
Yes.
So
Yes,
I'll come back to you again, okay?
She was a wonderful basketball player in high school, excellent basketball player. And of course, I was in athletics, she was in athletics. And so that helped tie us together. But we were, in fact, high school sweethearts.
Beautiful. What was on your mind when you knew that you were going to go to war and you are married?
The first thing that I thought about was I wanted to, I knew I was going to go to the war, and I wanted to return safely. I would say I was anxious. I was frightened at times, and before I went to Korea, but just thinking about, you know, what could happen and what would happen to my wife and so forth. So those were the thoughts, but the other thoughts I had was I was hopefully doing something good for the world, and there were so many other countries that were banded together, you know, for this effort to provide help for South Korea. And so I had that feeling. I was proud to go, happy to go, in some respects, many respects.
Was there any way that you could avoid this draft or without going to Korea?
I would say that most of the people that were drafted were going to Korea. And I don't think there was any way to avoid that unless I would go to a different country or something.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I would never have done that. But we were in a situation where after World War II, the country was tired of war. And they were happy with the victory, and the war was over.
Yeah.
And we were downsizing,
Right.
reducing our forces. And when the war then broke out in Korea, we were caught short in many respects. And we suffered, all the countries suffered terrible losses at the beginning of the war. And as you know, Dr., the United States alone, there was 37,000 losses in 3 years, which is terrible losses. And a lot of people don't remember that at all. But this year, the 60th anniversary, there's a lot of information now that are reminding people about this situation, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah. You said that you were commissioned to the second lieutenant.
Yes.
What kind of process did you go through to become an officer?
Well, I had to have.
You didn't have ROTC during the Temple University, right?
No, I did not.
No. So please explain it.
I had a direct commit. I had a college education, and at that time they were needing people with an extended education to commission those people and provide them in leadership positions. So the reason I could not avoid the situation, I volunteered for active duty. I wanted to go, but the reason that I was commissioned was because they needed officer personnel. I had a college education if I volunteered for active duty, and that's what I did.
Did you go to OCA, Officers Candidate School, or what kind of process did you go through to become?
I was commissioned and I was in the reserve,
right,
without any formal Army training at the moment.
Right.
No ROTC,
right,
nothing like that. But then I was called to active duty. I went to officer basic training at Fort Sam Houston for 6 weeks.
So that's only for the candidates who will become an officer later.
I believe, Doctor, everybody coming on active duty at that time, or coming out of the reserves, even though they may have military experience, they all went to, if they were commissioned, newly commissioned, then they all went to officer basic training at Fort Sam Houston.
But it's only for the officer candidate, not for the regular soldiers.
No.
That was for medical, right?
Yeah, I went to Fort Sam Houston, which was the largest medical complex in the country for basic training, and that officer basic training was for newly commissioned officers.
Right. So
and maybe there were some officers that were part of World War II that were out of the Army and then came back in or were recalled. They also went to basic training again because the training was different. The equipment was different. The logistics was different. The basic battle plan was different. How we would treat patients was different, so forth. So even though people would have had previous experience in World War II, they still went to basic training again.
So what was your mission? What is your specialty? You are not medical doctor,
right.
But what were you supposed to do in the battlefield?
Well, the doctor, of course, it's obvious what the doctor does. But there are many other things that occur in the medical department that are required. Not only do we have physicians, but we have, of course, we have nurses, we have dental people, we have physical therapy people, we have, and as far as leadership positions, what I was doing when I first went to Korea, I was assigned as a ambulance platoon leader. I was part of an ambulance company, and I had 10 ambulances which I controlled. In the company alone, there were 30 ambulances, 3 platoons, and a headquarters platoon, which was administration, food service, things like that, mechanical things, repairing the vehicles and so forth. But I had 1 platoon with 10 ambulances. And I may be getting a little ahead of the story, but as a result, I was assigned to a separate ambulance company that was part of 8th Corps. And being a separate company, we were assigned wherever the need was the greatest, wherever there was the most casualties to be evacuated by ambulance that's where our ambulances were assigned. And during that time in Korea, I participated helping people as part of some action in the 24th Infantry Division, the 40th Infantry Division, and the 8076 MASH Hospital.
24th and then 40.
24th Infantry Division,
Yeah.
the 40th Infantry Division,
40th.
yes, and the 8076 MASH Hospital, 8076
Mhm.
Mobile Army
MASH.
Surgical Hospital.
Yeah.
And that hospital at the time was positioned in at Huachan, by the Huachan Reservoir. And as a matter of interest,
Huachan.
Huachan,
Oh.
as a matter of interest, and that MASH hospital, that Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, the word mobile, explains that could pick up and move in a matter of hours to a different location, which it had done many times. And
Oh, before I forget, the Huachan, the lake, that's where there's so many Chinese were killed and buried, right?
well, there was a lot of action around that area, and there was a big dam,
Yeah.
the Huachan Dam, Huachan Reservoir. There was a lot of action, that was in North Korea, and a lot of action occurred in that area around that time.
Around that time.
And much of that early action I didn't participate in, but there was a lot still going on when I arrived.
Hmm. Okay, let's go back to. So when did you finish this officer basic training in Sam Houston?
I finished in, I finished in late July,
Mm-hmm.
and I went home to Philadelphia for a few days. Is that right, Mom?
Yeah, you had a couple
For a
days
few days
leave.
before I embarked to South Korea.
When and from where?
From the Oakland, I had orders to report to the Oakland Army Terminal. I think that was in Seattle, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I embarked on the ship, the Patrick.
Mm.
I have that information at home, but I believe it was the Patrick. And during those times, we went by ship, which was about 2 weeks. Now everybody flies, But anyhow,
Do you remember when was that? August?
it was in August.
August. Any remember date? Middle, early?
I think it was early August. Early August.
I had a lot of interview, and most of the soldiers took the troop ships from Seattle, Washington, and they said it was awful because people have seasick and vomiting all over. Was there any special section where the only officers were able to occupy?
Yes,
Tell me about that.
there was I think they were called staterooms on the vessel, and there were 4 officers in each compartment. It was called a compartment.
Uh-huh.
It was a very small compartment, but it had 4 bunks,
Uh-huh.
like 2 bunks, one on top of the other, and that was for officers. But we frequently would visit our troops, our soldiers that were in the lower decks and lower accommodations, and most of those were in canvas bunks also, but below deck. And we were below deck too, but in staterooms, and there were other rooms above us. I don't know who was in those rooms.
Why did you visit them?
Just to see our people that we knew, or some of our troops that we would be responsible for. And it's just, many of us would go and talk to those young men because there was anxiety and fear, but patriotism.
And did you stop by in Japan?
Yes, I think we arrived in
Sasebo? Sasebo?
no, Yokohama, maybe. Is that maybe a port?
Yeah.
And when we went to Korea, we had our basic uniform, which I think we purchased that uniform before we left. When we got to Japan, we were directed to a warehouse, and we moved everything, all our personal belongings, everything we had on, all our uniforms that were issued to us, or much of the uniforms were issued to us at Fort Sam Houston.
Why?
To get us ready to go.
Mm.
But when we arrived in Japan, everything was removed and we packed it in duffel bags and stored it in a warehouse with our name on it. And we were issued new equipment. And we were issued, it was summer, so we were issued really summer equipment. I remember we didn't have very much cold equipment when we hit a very cold winter.
Yeah.
So all that equipment that we brought with us was taken from us. New equipment was issued. And
new medical equipment?
I didn't receive any medical equipment except an aid pouch, first aid pouch, that everyone carried.
Mm-hmm.
And the medical equipment that we used and that the Maple Army Surgical Hospital used, that equipment, I'm sure, was issued to those people in Japan. And maybe when we received better logistics and better organization, much of that then was issued right in Korea.
Mm. Okay, go ahead.
We then embarked from Japan. I don't recall where we left from, but we took another ship to Sasebo, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And from there it was into Busan, Daegu, Daejeon, right up, kept being transferred up.
Where did you arrive in Korea and when? Do you remember?
I know it was probably late in August. And maybe
You arrived in Busan.
Busan.
Mm. Could you describe the scene, the first scene you ever had as soon as you arrived in Busan? How was the scene? How was people, what they were doing, how terrible their situation was?
It was terrible. And that was, my first impression was just sadness. There was total devastation. And the buildings were devastated. The roads were, on each side of the road there was nothing but rubble that had cleared the roads. And of course, that was my first impression, plus just sadness for the people. There were, I could tell that many of the people were just so hungry. I could just tell. And I felt that sadness. And another thing I remember was there were no trees. There was no foliage. And I was told later that in order for the people to keep warm, they had to do something. So a lot of the trees were destroyed by the war, but much of the trees were destroyed because people needed firewood to keep warm. I saw people living in cardboard boxes, and it just terrible, Doctor, terrible. But you know, it helped provide you a good, hard-working attitude to remedy the situation. And everybody had that spirit eventually. We need to help this country, we need to help these people. Because, as you know, there was so much up, all the way up north, all the way back down south. The perimeter south, all the way up north again, all the way down south again, until Incheon. So when we brought our forces in Incheon, that made a difference.
But so from Busan, where did you go?
I think from Busan I went, I'm not quite sure what town was next, but as I remember it was either Daejeon or Daegu. And it was right up the center of the peninsula, right up.
That's the Daejeon.
Uh-huh.
Daejeon. And what was your mission? Were you went there because they called you, they needed, or what is
I went there.
What is the rule that you've been around?
I still was not assigned to an ambulance company yet. I didn't receive that assignment, and they were still determining where people were going to go and what they were going to be doing. And I had another interview, and I think that might have been in Daejeon, and that's when I was assigned to the 584th Ambulance Company. 584 Ambulance Company.
Uh-huh.
And then I reported to that ambulance company. I think I was taken up in a Jeep, and that company at the time was in Hwacheon.
Mm. Tell me about the Hwacheon. What's the scene that you had first?
We had our quarters were. I had one small tent, but there were foxholes all over the place and bunkers. But and the 8076 hospital was all set up in tent each, big tents, and the ambulance company was right beside the 8076 hospital, the 584th Ambulance Company.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was also
806 means it's the number, right?
number 8076. Yeah, that's a number. A number of the,
No. You said that you were assigned to 584 Ambulance Company.
Yes.
And then you went to Hwacheon.
Yes.
And the hospital name in Hwacheon was 806.
8076.
76.
Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, MASH.
Okay. This is first time for me to interview who are in the medical field. I had an interview with the MASH nurse, the female.
Uh-huh.
But she couldn't give me detailed information about this MASH. The scale, how many doctors, how many nurses, and what kind of equipments and what kind of duties medical treatment was done there, executed. Could you tell me about that?
Well,
In the case of Hwacheon, how big was it?
Well, in the area where the hospital was located, there were very few people, very few South Korean people living there. Of course, everyone was going as far south as possible.
Yeah.
But there were a few people, and but they were living in just wherever they could find shelter. But there's very few people there, Korean people. But the hospital itself was configured. There was a surgical area.
Uh-huh.
People were brought in to one particular area, and many times the people brought in, evacuated into that surgical hospital for treatment, still had their uniforms on. Some people in the wintertime, I recall, we brought in people that were in their sleeping bags at the time, and they were wounded in their bags. and they were just left that way until they could get treatment right away. So some people were brought right in their bags that were wounded in their bags. And there was an area where people were triaged, where this person can wait for care, this person has to be seen immediately, this person can wait, and so forth. That was a triage area. The people that had to be seen immediately were taken into surgery, and they were moving right. If it was a lot of action occurring and a lot of casualties coming in, and the casualties, we knew when they would arrive because people start talking about oblivion. That's the word they used. Oblivion was coming, and sure enough.
Could you spell it? Oblivion?
Oblivion.
Believe it?
Oblivion. It's just a slang word.
Okay.
Like a big object.
Okay.
Oblivion. B-L-I-V-I-T.
B-L-I-V-I-T.
V-I-T. That's that term they used. And when the people would begin to arrive by ambulance, some were division ambulances that were assigned to division. Some were our ambulances that we would evacuate. The front line of the main line of a resistance, the front lines, would have an aid station. Behind the aid station, there was a collecting station.
Mm-hmm.
Behind the collection station was a clearing company.
Mm-hmm.
These were the different levels of evacuation.
Mm-hmm.
So people that were very seriously injured normally came as fast as possible to the MASH hospital.
Where MASH is located in this hierarchy? Aid station, collecting, and clearing.
They were.
And then after MASH?
I would say they were separate. People could come if they were very badly injured and a helicopter could get them out. They would come by helicopter to the MASH hospital because we had a helicopter detachment also assigned to the MASH hospital.
Yeah.
So they were not in the normal
hierarchy
rotation of aid station, collecting, clearing, so forth.
But MASH is the biggest unit.
MASH was the biggest unit that could do big surgery. They could do neurosurgery if it was necessary, if they could do it. I mean, they could do it. There was a special team of neurosurgeons and a special MASH hospital with neurosurgeons.
Mm-hmm.
The 8076
mm-hmm.
MASH did not have a neurosurgical team.
Mm-hmm.
But times we would have to evacuate a head case, a head wound, to a MASH hospital that had that capability. And our ambulances would do that.
How big the 8076 MASH unit? How many doctors, how many nurses, what kind of equipment?
I would say they had, I'm guessing, doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Guessing.
Yeah.
I would say 10 doctors,
Mm-hmm.
15 nurses,
Mm-hmm.
and technicians that are helping with x-rays, lab work, and those types of things. I would say maybe 20 people.
Wow.
It's a big operation.
Mm-hmm.
They had the logistics to move, they had the trucks, they had the skill to break down the hospital, take it apart, move it, set it up again in a matter of hours.
Was it inside of the tent or was it in the building?
They were in tents.
In tents.
Yes.
And you were able to do all of this, X-ray and lab test?
Yes.
And how did you provide heat during the winter?
Provide what?
Heat.
Oh, heat?
Yeah.
They were heated, doctor. There were heaters.
Heaters.
Yes, and big blowers that would blow in heat into the tents.
So it's oil, gasoline, or what is it?
Oil.
Oil?
I'm sure it was oil.
Okay, so...
And that's the way the tents were heated, with oil.
So was it cold?
Was it cold inside?
Right.
No, not really.
Not really. Even during the winter.
But it was chilly.
Chilly?
Yeah,
Mm.
it was cold outside.
Were most nurses female or both?
Most nurses were female that I had occasion to know at the MASH hospital.
How did they survive it? How did they?
They had
The female nurses.
they had their separate quarters, and I don't know much about how they survived, but I know that they had facilities to wash clothes and things like that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
At times there would be a shower unit that would come, and they would set up showers for people, depending on the operations that were going on. And if they could come in, if there was not too much action at the time, if they could come in, they would set up a shower, and you would shower. Maybe that would occur once every 2 weeks or so, if you were lucky. But
So no shower for 2 weeks.
that's right. Oh yeah, maybe longer, doctor. Maybe longer. But you use your helmet, to wash. But again, my specific duties being attached to the MASH hospital, we were just positioned there to provide evacuation. And the workings of the MASH hospital, I have to guess at those things. But they did excellent work.
Let me ask you this question. I want to know average number of patients, if possible. When did you leave Korea?
Did I come home in July of 51?
I think in August. He was there exactly a year, I believe.
Okay, so
August
52.
Yeah,
August
it
of
was
52.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was the rotation, right? 1 year at that time.
It might not be an appropriate question. I don't know how to ask this, but what are the scenes that you are really shocked and so that still bothers you in your minds about this wounded and the death that you witness in the hospital unit or in the ambulance? Anything that you want to introduce?
There was several things that I always remember, and one, there was a South Korean soldier that received a head wound,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to evacuate him to the MASH hospital that had the capability to provide neurosurgeon, and he couldn't be flown because of the weather. Helicopters couldn't fly him,
Mm-hmm.
so he had to go by ambulance, and we had to do it at nighttime.
Mm.
It was a night evacuation, and I went with the driver, the ambulance driver, on that evacuation,
Mm-hmm.
and for experience
Mm-hmm.
on my part, and he knew the way to go. Of course, I didn't know, but he did, the driver. We had one patient in the ambulance, and we had him restrained because he was frantic and wild. We had him restrained. It's terrible.
Did you use painkiller? Morphine?
He had morphine, but
What's
I think he had morphine. But see, he was treated as much as he could at the MASH hospital, the 8076, then loaded into our ambulance, and we had to go as soon as possible, and it might have taken an hour to get there. But the thing I remember most, we had him restrained with a web belt
Uh-huh.
on each arm, and he was so frantic that he broke those belts.
Wow.
And I couldn't imagine that happening.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I remember was a patient that was flown in by ambulance, by air ambulance, a helicopter,
Yeah.
for treatment at the MASH hospital, but it was too late. He had a head wound. but it
American
was-
soldier?
American soldier, but it was self-inflicted. He committed suicide. So,
Because of the pain?
I don't know. But
Oh,
he,
oh.
he came in on the helicopter with the head wound already,
Uh-huh.
but they said that he had shot himself.
Shot himself.
Yeah. So that I remembered. Another thing I really remember, Doctor, we found in one of the bunkers a baby, just a little child, no mother, no father.
Korean baby,
Korean baby. Couldn't find the mother or father.
right?
Just a little baby. I have a photograph of that in the albums. But I was holding the baby, and we evacuated the baby, I think, to the Korean Red Cross, through the Korean Red Cross. And we took the baby. Baby was taken to Chuncheon.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know what happened to the baby after that. But these were the types of things I remember. They were the sad things. There were many good things I remember, many good things.
Tell me about good things.
The good things is all the patients that we're able to help. I always remember, not specifically, but I remember the patients that we were helping. And I can remember how the suffering they were receiving and experiencing. And I can remember the word all the time. They would say, itai, itai, taksan itai, pain. I don't know if that's the right word or pronunciation.
That's Japanese.
Japanese? Anyhow, taksan itai. But we didn't evacuate any Japanese. But anyhow, we evacuated South Korean soldiers, North Korean soldiers if necessary, Chinese soldiers if necessary. Not too many Chinese. But we evacuated North Korean too, whoever needed help. So I remember that.
Did you provide the treatment for North Korean soldier and Chinese soldier, or just evacuating?
Just evacuate.
Had you done any treatment for enemies?
The only treatment I did was I call it treatment because this individual was happy about it. This was a Chinese soldier.
Mm-hmm.
He looked to be about a teenager, just a young boy. I couldn't tell, but he was wounded. He was smiling, and I gave him a cigarette. He was very happy for the cigarette. But as far as that was the only treatment I gave, it was a comfort treatment. I didn't give any other treatment as such to a North Korean or a South Korean, other than the evacuation.
It's very new to me because you providing me the details about what happened during this mass units and for the patients and those people who died of these disastrous actions.
Yes.
So did you stay at the Hwacheon MASH or throughout the whole service, or
No.
did you move around?
No, my platoon was moved several times, somewhere to Grizzly. Grizzly was the name of the 40th Infantry Division. Grizzly, which is it's a slang word for a bear, grizzly bear.
I know.
So I was with the 40th Division for a while, evacuating patients, and I don't know what area, but it was in North Korea. I was with the 24th in an area called Chupari, Mortar Junction. The slang word was
Chupori.
Chupari.
That was a 24th Division?
24th Division, like a lot of mountains, a lot of big hills in that area. Mortar Junction,
Mm-hmm.
and the 40th Division. I could look at my records and find out,
Yeah, yeah.
but I don't remember where it was. But those areas, and so again, that's how I spend most of my time was with the ambulance company in different areas. But most of the time, I was attached to the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. I would say probably half of my service there was with the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital.
Was MASH safe from the attacks from the enemy?
Yes, they were relatively safe. But
Why? Because it was far rear, or was there any special military unit to protect it?
there were times that they had to move, but that was early in the war. There were times that they had to move because the action was coming toward them very fast. So they were as close as they could be and still provide that element of safety to all their equipment and the work that they do, and the professional people involved, the experts that were helping people. So, but I wouldn't say they were always in a safe area. You know, there was always that worriment. There was always foxholes that people could use, and there was on several occasions that we saw aircraft, MiG aircraft, I guess Russian, Chinese aircraft come
MiG.
over, and there was an air raid, a lot of air raid drills, everybody would go to the foxhole or go to the bunkers, you know.
Was it drill or actual case?
Some were real air raids that were necessary because we saw the aircraft way in the sky, but most of them were just drills.
Mm-hmm. Were there any shortage of medical logistical items like morphine? Was it abundant? Did you have any shortage? Medical equipment, medicines, and
I know that I would guess again that the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital always had the proper equipment and enough equipment at the hospital. Now, in the division area where we had medics in the division, and at the aid station there was a doctor. At the collecting station, clearing station, there were doctors there too, not many, but I think they would have adequate equipment, or most of the time they had adequate equipment. I can't speak to that.
okay. Any more details about what happened during your service in MASH and ambulance units that I haven't asked?
I was happy to come home and see my wife safely, and at that time we had all our plans were to leave the service. We still had a
No, I'm talking about during Korea, when you were in Korea. I'm going to ask that question a little later.
yes. I think the thing that I can remember most was the conditions when I left. When I went and moved south to begin my departure, things appeared to be getting better for the people. I could tell the buildings were being repaired, and I took a lot of photographs while I was there, a lot of movies, and when I went back the second time, I tried to go to the same place to show the difference, and I was able to do that in some respects. But while I was there, I think essentially that was it. I had a feeling, my feeling was I was always helping somebody. I was not required to try to kill someone.
Mm.
I was always in a position where I was able to help somebody, whether regardless of who it was. If they needed help, we helped them.
Okay. How often did you write letter to your wife?
Well, I wrote letters to my wife every chance I could, which was mostly every day. I always try to find a way to do it every day.
Do you still keep the letter?
We have most of our letters, some of the early letters have gone away, but my wife would write to me every day, and it was every day she wrote, every day.
One contents you still remember that you wrote back to your husband? Any contents that you still remember in your letter?
Well, of course, I always wrote that I missed him and prayed for him, and we couldn't wait to see him again, and just told him about maybe what happened at the office that day, and maybe responded to whatever he had written to me, and then he would occasionally send pictures, and I remember one time he sent the picture of the baby that they found, and of course that was very heart-touching. And that's about, what we wrote, just what was going on back home. That I seen his mom and dad, and his mom would say, well, he hasn't written to me lately. And I'd say, well.
Do you remember the moment that he returned to you?
Well, that was a strange thing. He wrote that he was coming home, right? And of course, I was working in downtown Philadelphia at an office, and so I knew that it took at least 2 weeks to get home. So this one evening after work, I stayed in town with some of my girlfriends that I worked for, and then I just happened to call home to tell my dad and mom that I would be home a little later. My dad said, well, where are you? Jack is in, I forget where he came back, in Oakland, California. I said, what? And my dad said, yes. And I said, oh my goodness. Or he was on his way and he would be in, say, the next day or something. So I went back into work the next day, and I told my boss I worked for as a stenographer. And so these men were all excited for me, and I said, what do I do? So they called a hotel in New York for me. I think it was the Drake Hotel, and they made reservations for me and Jack. And the next morning, my dad took me to the train station in Philadelphia.
You were so excited.
Yes, I was. And I got to the train station and got to New York. And then I met him at some terminal, and of course he had boots on, and I don't know what else he had on that day. So we
Was he smelly?
No, he was pretty clean, but I think we did have to clean him up. But the first thing we did, I think, was take him and buy him shoes, because he had his big army boots on, And then we checked into the hotel, and we had like 2 or 3 days there, which were nice. And everything worked out. And then, of course, his parents were anxious to see him, and we quick got back to Philadelphia, and so they were all happy to see their baby boy come home from the war. But I remember that distinctly, because I didn't anticipate he was going to be home this soon, And but anyhow, that was my recollection of, here I was, downtown Philadelphia with my friends, and he's on his way home, and here I had waited so long for that moment, right? And I'm out having a good time with my friends. Not really, but,
Thank God he's back, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
When did you go back to Korea?
I went back to Korea 20 years later, in 1973.
Why?
We still had a strong force in Korea, and there was a rotation policy,
Yeah.
and so there was a vacancy, and by that time I was lieutenant colonel
Mm-hmm.
in the military, in the medical department,
Mm-hmm.
and I was assigned duties as the executive assistant to the 8th Army surgeon, and he wore 3 hats, as I did too, as his assistant. He was the physician, the medical representative for the United Nations for our forces in Korea, and he was the division. He was in charge of all the medical units in Korea and the division units, medical units, and the United Nations medical efforts.
Mm-hmm.
So he wore 3 hats, and I was his executive assistant to those 3 areas.
Mm-hmm. So, how long did you stay there?
I stayed there for 1 year.
What did you see the difference between the time that you served first in 1951 to 52 and 1973?
It was amazing, just unbelievable, amazing, because I had been there at some of the worst times, and I come back at some of the best times. In 20 years, I couldn't believe this could happen to a country. In 20 years. And the buildings were just like a modern city in Seoul and Yongsan. It was just so beautiful. And department stores, the people, you could tell everybody was just so changed. Everyone was healthy. Everyone had good spirit. Everyone was working. I would be part of different functions that were held, and they were orchestrated in an outstanding way. The best of everything, and it's just such a change from what I experienced previously to what my new duties were more, I wouldn't say diplomatic, but they were. We were still able to do a lot of good work with our forces there and our protecting the South and so forth. But it was we were kind of like ambassadors, to the South Koreans, and we were so well accepted into the country, and no one ever forgot what we had tried to do, and we were successful, of course, in doing what we did, and what a recovery the country had made. It still amazes me to think now that looking at the Olympics, the next Winter Olympics will be in Korea, and the summer, when the Summer Olympics was in Korea. I can't believe it, that here the country, their gross national product, they're 15th in the world. I mean, it's unbelievable, the country, the recovery and the spirit of the people, hardworking, the honesty, the affiliations that they've made throughout the world, the leader of the United Nations. I mean, it's amazing what the country has done. And they have never forgotten the United States.
What is the major impact of the Korean War in your life, and how did you put all those hard times into a perspective, looking back all those years from now? What is the major impact, and how do you see it in your life, the Korean War service?
Well, as a result of the Korean War, I entered the service.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would not have done that if there was no war. But as a result of that service, I was able to complete my graduate work, and I have a master's degree in hospital administration, and I was able to receive that training at Baylor University while I was on duty in the United States Army. So as a result of the Korean War my commission. I stayed in the service.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to do not only my graduate work and get that finished, but then as a result of retiring, I was also able to spend 15 years in hospital administration after I retired at one hospital in San Antonio and one hospital in Corpus Christi, Texas.
When you visit Korea, okay, you received some photographs from him when he served in Korea for the first time, and then you went to see Korea. Were you able to see the difference?
Oh, yes, I could. Some of the photographs he showed, there was just nothing in the background. And of course, a lot of them were the scenes of him living in the tents and, the other enlisted people in the tents, and he would just show around the areas, the bunkers and the foxholes, and he always talked about this young houseboy that he had and it was always delightful to hear about this young man, and I forget what his name was, but oh yeah, I could see the difference. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Korea, to visit him in the 70s, why, it was just amazing what everything was just so beautiful, and I had a really nice time there, and I would go down to when he was working, I would go down to the Red Cross in town, and there was this delightful young Korean, a young man that worked there, and he would take me around to the department stores, and all the girls. Shinsegae was it called or something, but yeah, and all the girls would look at us, all the Korean clerks, and think, ooh.
Any last comment that you want to leave to this interview?
Well, it seems like even though we've been retired for a long time, we're always doing things that brings us back and closer to Korea. A member of the chapter, and wherever there's an event that occurs, why we try to attend it if possible. And but one thing we always amazes us is the fact that the people in South Korea has never forgotten, and there's always these new things that are occurring, And again, we just have a warm spot in our heart for South Korea and North Korea.
Mm. This is very rare interview that I heard so detailed description of what happened in the match. And you were Nightingale in Korea. You must have saved thousands of people. And as you mentioned, Koreans never forget that. We were able to make what Korea is now because of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much again.